The blood splattered across her dress told a story of violence that shocked even the most hardened frontiersmen in the territory. Kade Fairweather reined in his horse so abruptly that dust rose in clouds around them, the setting sun of the New Mexico territory casting long shadows across the ravine where her body lay. It was 1875, a time when life was cheap on the frontier, but the sight before him still made his stomach turn. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, dismounting in a swift motion honed by years in the saddle. The woman lay crumpled like a discarded doll, her dark hair matted with blood and dirt. What had once been a fine calico dress was torn and bloodied, with the word "Unwanted" crudely burned into the fabric across her chest. Kade knelt beside her, expecting to find another victim of the harsh realities of Western expansion, but when he pressed 2 fingers against her neck, he felt it faint but unmistakable, the flutter of a pulse. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. The woman's eyelids fluttered, revealing glimpses of deep brown eyes before closing again. A moan escaped her lips, barely audible above the whisper of the evening breeze through the canyon grass. Kade worked quickly, gathering her broken form into his arms with the gentleness he usually reserved for newborn calves on his struggling ranch. His horse, Buck, a sturdy palomino that had carried him through 5 years of hard riding, snorted nervously at the smell of blood. "Easy boy," Kade soothed. "We're bringing her home." Home was a generous term for the small cabin and modest corral that comprised the Fairweather Ranch, 15 miles outside the settlement of Hope Springs. It wasn't much, just a hardscrabble piece of land that Kade had won in a poker game 3 years prior, but it was his, and now it would be a sanctuary for this broken woman. The ride back was slow and careful. Every jolt seemed to draw a pained whimper from his unconscious passenger, who he'd positioned in front of him in the saddle, her head lolling against his chest. By the time the cabin came into view, twilight had deepened into full dark, and Kade's arms ached from maintaining his protective hold. Inside, he laid her on his bed, the only proper furniture in the one-room cabin besides a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. By lamplight, the extent of her injuries became clearer. Bruises marred her face, a deep gash ran along her hairline, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Kade worked methodically, drawing on skills learned during the war. He cleaned her wounds with water boiled on the potbelly stove, stitched the worst gashes with catgut from his rudimentary medical kit, and wrapped her ribs, which he suspected were cracked from the bruising across her torso. Throughout his ministrations, the woman remained mercifully unconscious. It wasn't until he'd finished and collapsed, exhausted, into the chair beside the bed that her eyes opened fully for the first time. Where she tried to speak, but her voice emerged as a rasp. "You're safe," Kade said, reaching for the cup of water he'd prepared. "Can you drink?" He supported her head as she took small sips, wincing with each swallow. When she'd had enough, she sank back against the pillow, studying him with eyes that held equal measures of fear and gratitude. "My name is Kade Fairweather," he offered. "I found you in Blackthorn Ravine. You've been badly hurt, but you're going to live." She closed her eyes, and for a moment, he thought she'd slipped back into unconsciousness. Then a tear slid down her cheek. "Delilah," she whispered. "Delilah Blackwood." "Rest now, Miss Blackwood," Kade said, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Questions can wait until morning." But morning brought fever instead of clarity. Delilah tossed and turned, muttering incoherently as infection took hold. Kade rode hard to Hope Springs, returning with the town's only doctor, a grizzled old man named Henderson who'd patched up more gunshot wounds than he could count. "She's fighting hard," Henderson said after examining her. "Whoever did this meant for her to die slow. But she'll live," Kade pressed. Henderson gave him a measured look. "If the fever breaks, if infection doesn't set in deeper, if her will holds." He packed his bag, Cool compresses. Willow bark tea when she's conscious enough to swallow. Send for me if she worsens. For 3 days, Kade barely slept. He bathed Delilah's forehead with cool water, spooned broth between her cracked lips when possible, and changed the dressings on her wounds. He spoke to her constantly, telling her about his ranch, his dreams of expanding beyond the meager cattle herd he currently managed, and the apple trees he'd planted that spring anything to anchor her to life. On the 4th morning, he awoke from an unintended doze to find her watching him, her eyes clear for the first time since that brief moment of lucidity. "You saved me," she said simply. Kade straightened in his chair. "The fever's broken." "Yes." She attempted to shift position and winced. "How long have I been here?" "For days." "Do you remember anything about what happened to you?" "Who might have?" He gestured vaguely toward her, unwilling to directly reference the word that had been burned into her dress, now replaced by one of his own shirts. Delilah's expression shuddered. "Enough to know I can never go back." Over the next week, as Delilah's strength gradually returned, fragments of her story emerged. She had been the ward of a wealthy cattle baron named Emerson Blake, whose wife had taken her in as a child when her parents' distant cousins of Mrs. Blake died of typhoid. Raised alongside the Blake son, Marcus, she had been treated as family until Mrs. Blake passed 2 years prior. "That's when everything changed," she explained one evening as they sat by the fire, Delilah propped up with pillows in Kade's one comfortable chair. "Marcus began to notice me differently." His father encouraged it. Kade's jaw tightened as he stoked the fire, already anticipating where this story was headed. "When Marcus proposed, I refused him. I didn't love him, could never love him. He'd grown cruel like his father." She twisted the blanket between her fingers. "They weren't used to hearing no." "So they tried to kill you," Kade said flatly. Delilah nodded. "Marcus beat me." His father watched. "They thought I was dead when they burned that word into my dress and left me in the ravine." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Property that wouldn't behave as expected becomes unwanted." Rage surged through Kade's veins, but he tamped it down. "The Blakes control half the territory. Their brand is on more cattle than any 3 ranchers combined. You know them." Alarm flashed in Delilah's eyes. "Of them," Kade clarified, "everyone does. But I've never had dealings with them directly. My operation is too small to register on their radar." "They'll be looking for me," Delilah said. "Not because they want me back, but because they'll want to finish what they started if they learn I survived." Kade considered this. "For now, you're safe here. No one comes this way except by intention, and I'm not expecting visitors." As spring blossomed into summer, Delilah's physical wounds healed. The bruises faded, the cuts closed into thin white lines, and her movements became less guarded. But Kade noticed how she startled at unexpected sounds, how she positioned herself to always face doors and windows, how her sleep was troubled by nightmares that left her gasping in the darkness. He'd given her his bed, fashioning a pallet for himself near the stove. Though the arrangement wasn't proper by society's standards, there was a respectful distance between them that neither sought to breach. By the time Delilah could move without pain, she insisted on contributing to the household. She took over cooking, transforming Kade's simple fare into meals that made him close his eyes in appreciation with the first bite. She mended his clothes with neat, invisible stitches, and when he returned from long days tending cattle, the cabin was filled with the scent of fresh bread and scrubbed clean. "You don't have to earn your keep," Kade told her one evening as she served a stew that made his usual version taste like leather and dirt by comparison. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm building my strength, and paying a debt I can never fully repay. There is no debt between us." Delilah looked at him then, really looked at him, and Kade felt something shift in the air between them. There are different kinds of debts, Mr. Fairweather. Kade, he corrected automatically. After all this time, surely we can dispense with formalities. A genuine smile lit her face, transforming it. Kade realized with a start that she was beautiful not in the fragile, porcelain way of ladies in Eastern salons, but with a quiet strength that had emerged through her suffering. Kade, she agreed. The first time he took her to Hope Springs, nearly 2 months after finding her, Kade was acutely aware of the curious glances thrown their way. Small frontier towns thrived on gossip, and a single man returning with an unknown woman was fodder for speculation. "Mrs. Fairweather, I presume?" the general store owner said with undisguised interest as Delilah selected fabric. Before Kade could correct him, Delilah smiled serenely. "Yes, we've been married just a short while." Later, as they rode home with supplies, Kade questioned her about the lie. "It was simpler than explaining the truth," Delilah said pragmatically. "And safer. No one will connect Delilah Fairweather to Delilah Blackwood, the missing ward of Emerson Blake. You've thought this through." "I've had little else to do but think these past weeks." She paused. "I hope you don't mind the presumption." Kade considered how to respond. The idea of Delilah as his wife stirred feelings he'd been carefully containing. "It's a practical solution," he finally said, his tone neutral. That evening, Delilah sewed by lamplight, her needle flashing as she transformed the fabric into a new dress. Kade pretended to read a months-old newspaper, but his attention kept returning to her, the curve of her neck, the way a strand of dark hair fell across her cheek, the subtle changes in her face as concentration gave way to satisfaction with each completed seam. "We could make it real," he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could reconsider them. Delilah's hands stilled. "What?" "The marriage. It would offer you protection. No one would question your presence here. And if the Blakes ever came looking." He trailed off, realizing how pragmatic and unromantic his proposal sounded. "You would do that?" Delilah's voice was carefully controlled. "Tie yourself to a woman you barely know, who brings nothing but danger to your door." Kade set aside the newspaper. "I know enough. I know you're strong, resilient. I know you work hard and face each day with courage despite what was done to you. I know that this cabin has become a home since you arrived." He took a deep breath. "And I know that the thought of you leaving someday feels like a wound I'm not sure would heal." Delilah stared at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. "That sounds dangerously close to a declaration, Mr. Fairweather." "Perhaps it is." Kade moved to kneel beside her chair. "I'm not offering out of pity or mere protection, Delilah. These months, something has grown between us. Something I'd like to nurture, if you'd allow it." For a long moment, Delilah was silent, her eyes searching his face. Then she reached out, her fingers hesitantly touching his cheek. "I don't know if I can be what a wife should be. There are scars you can't see. I'm not asking for anything you aren't ready to give," Kade said, covering her hand with his own. "Just the chance to build something together, at your pace." The wedding took place the following Sunday, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who visited Hope Springs monthly. The only witnesses were Dr. Henderson and his wife, who had taken a motherly interest in Delilah during her visits to town. Delilah wore the dress she'd sewn, a modest creation of cornflower blue that brought out flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Kade, in his only good shirt and a freshly brushed hat, felt his breath catch when she walked into the small church. "Do you, Kade Fairweather, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher intoned. "I do," Kade said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Delilah Blackwood, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" A moment's hesitation, then, "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The preacher closed his Bible. You may kiss your bride. Kade leaned forward, pressing the gentlest of kisses to Delilah's lips there first. It was brief, respectful, but he felt her tremble slightly against him. That night, back at the cabin, an awkward tension filled the space between them. Kade made a show of checking the stove, banking the fire for the night, anything to give Delilah time to prepare for bed. When he finally turned, she stood by the bed, their bed, now her hands clasped tightly before her. I meant what I said, Kade told her. Nothing happens that you don't want. I can still sleep by the stove. Delilah shook her head. No. I want to try to be a real wife, but I may need patience. We have time, Kade said simply. All the time you need. That night, they lay side by side, a careful space between them. But sometime in the darkness, when nightmares came for Delilah as they still often did, Kade's arms became her sanctuary. She woke to find herself curled against him, his warmth a shield against the terrors of her dreams, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Summer gave way to autumn, and the rhythms of ranch life provided structure to their days. Kade taught Delilah to ride properly, not side saddle as she'd been instructed in her previous life, but astride like a woman who belonged in this wild country. She proved an apt pupil, her natural grace translating to horsemanship that soon had her helping with the cattle. Their nights evolved too. The space between them in bed gradually disappeared as Delilah's trust in Kade deepened. Tentative touches became explorations, fear gave way to curiosity, and finally, on a night when the first snow of winter tapped against the windows, they truly became husband and wife. Afterward, as Delilah lay in his arms, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Did I hurt you? Kade asked, alarmed. No, she whispered. These aren't sad tears. I never thought I could feel this way safe, cherished. I never thought I could want someone's touch after. Kade brushed the tears away with his thumb. You are cherished, Delilah Fairweather, more than I have words to express. Winter settled over the land, sealing them in a cocoon of intimacy. Long evenings by the fire, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Kade spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his service in the Union Army during the war, and his journey west seeking a fresh start. Delilah revealed more about her years with the Blakes. Not all dark, for Mrs. Blake had been kind and had ensured Delilah received an education unusual for a girl in the territories. She would have protected me, Delilah said one night, if she had lived. As the snow melted and the first green shoots pushed through the soil, Delilah and Kade began to plan for the future. The cattle herd had grown modestly, and with careful management, they might be able to expand. Delilah's vegetable garden would provide food for their table and perhaps excess to sell in town. It was during a spring visit to Hope Springs that their carefully constructed peace shattered. They had separated to complete different errands, Kade to arrange the sale of 2 steers, Delilah to purchase seeds for her garden. As she exited the general store, a familiar voice froze her blood. Well, if it isn't the ghost herself. Marcus Blake stood before her, flanked by 2 ranch hands. His handsome face twisted into a cruel smile as he took in her appearance. We thought the coyotes would have picked your bones clean by now, he said conversationally. Father will be most interested to hear of your resurrection. Delilah straightened her spine, fighting the urge to flee. Your father has no claim on me, Marcus. I'm a married woman now. Marcus laughed. Married? To whom? Some dirt farmer with no idea what damaged goods he's acquired. To me. Kade's voice cut through the tension as he stepped between Delilah and Marcus. Kade Fairweather, and I suggest you speak with more respect to my wife. Marcus appraised Kade with contempt. Fairweather? That scrub piece of land north of town? How fitting that our discarded trash found its way to a garbage heap. Kade's hand moved toward his holster, but Delilah gripped his arm. "He's not worth it," she murmured. "Please." The standoff drew the attention of townspeople, who gathered at a cautious distance. Marcus noticed the audience and smiled thinly. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Father doesn't tolerate loose ends, especially ones that might talk." His gaze flickered to Delilah's stomach, which had just begun to show the slightest curve beneath her dress. "Or breed." With that, he turned and strode toward the saloon, his men following. The ride home was tense, both of them lost in thought. It wasn't until they reached the safety of their cabin that Delilah collapsed into a chair, her composure finally breaking. "They'll come for us," she said, her voice hollow. "For me. For our child." Kade knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I won't let them hurt you, either of you." "You don't know them like I do," Delilah insisted. "Emerson Blake destroys anything that threatens his reputation or control. If people learned how they treated me, what they did, then perhaps that's our protection," Kade said slowly. "The truth." That night they formulated a plan. The next morning, Kade rode to the territorial newspaper office in Santa Fe, carrying affidavits from Dr. Henderson confirming Delilah's injuries when she was found, and from the preacher who had witnessed her account of the Blakes' attempt on her life. He also carried a letter in Delilah's own hand, detailing her years with the family and the events leading to her abandonment in Blackthorn Ravine. "If anything happens to either of us," Kade instructed the editor, "publish these immediately. Send copies to the governor and to newspapers in Denver and St. Louis." The editor, a man who had crossed paths with Emerson Blake in business dealings and found him wanting in ethics, agreed to hold the documents. "Insurance," Kade explained to Delilah upon his return. "Blake values his reputation above all. The threat of exposure may keep him in check." They reinforced the cabin, added extra locks, and Kade taught Delilah to shoot with accuracy that surprised them both. "I won't be helpless again," she said after hitting a tin can at 50 paces. Summer passed with no sign of the Blakes, though Kade and Delilah remained vigilant. Their child grew within her, kicking strongly enough that Kade could feel it when he placed his hand on her expanding belly. "A son, do you think?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders. "Or a daughter with her father's determination," Delilah countered, leaning into his embrace. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't the violent raid they had feared. Instead, Emerson Blake himself rode onto their property one October afternoon, accompanied only by a single ranch hand. Kade met them in the yard, rifle in hand, while Delilah watched from the window, her father's old Colt revolver ready. "Mr. Fairweather," Blake called, reining in his expensive horse. "I believe we have matters to discuss." "Nothing to discuss with a man who leaves women for dead in ravines," Kade replied evenly. Blake's weathered face betrayed no emotion. "I understand you've been making certain arrangements, insurance as it were, just ensuring my family's safety." "A commendable instinct." Blake dismounted, moving with the stiffness of age. "I've come to propose an arrangement of mutual benefit." "I'm listening," Kade said, rifle still trained on the older man. "My son acted impulsively, regrettably." Blake's tone suggested annoyance rather than remorse. "What happened to Miss Blackwood, Mrs. Fairweather, now, I understand, was unfortunate." "Attempted murder goes beyond unfortunate." Blake waved a hand dismissively. "Semantics. What matters is moving forward. I propose this: you and your wife retain those documents as insurance. In exchange, we agree to mutual non-interference. The Blakes have no knowledge of Delilah Blackwood's whereabouts or fate. The Fairweathers have no cause for complaint against the Blake family. And Marcus, my son, is no longer in the territory. His temperament proved unsuitable for the responsibilities of our operation. He's been established in California, where he will remain. Kade lowered his rifle slightly. Why should we trust you? Because I'm a businessman, Mr. Fairweather. Bad blood is bad business. Scandals are costly. I've built an empire I intend to preserve. Blake's eyes narrowed. And because even a man like me can recognize when Providence has arranged a more suitable outcome. Delilah was never meant for my son. His mother would have seen that had she lived. The door of the cabin opened, and Delilah stepped out, one hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. Blake's gaze flickered to her, something unreadable passing across his face. You look well, Delilah, he said, his voice softer than before. Better than I expected. No thanks to you, she replied steadily. You watched him beat me. You helped carry me to that ravine. Blake inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying. What would you have me do now? Would my death satisfy you? My ruin. Delilah moved to stand beside Kade. I want to live in peace. I want my child to grow up without fear. I want never to hear the name Blake again unless it's in passing reference to a distant, unrelated family. Then we want the same thing. Blake mounted his horse. Goodbye, Delilah, Mr. Fairweather. He tipped his hat, and without another word, rode away, his man following. They stood in silence until the riders disappeared from view. Do you believe him? Kade asked finally. Delilah released a shaky breath. Strangely, yes. Emerson Blake is many things, but he's practical above all. The agreement serves his interests. Then it's over? Yes, Delilah said, turning into his embrace. That chapter is closed. Their daughter, Catherine Rose Fairweather, was born on a clear December morning, her lusty cries filling the cabin with new life. Dr. Henderson declared her perfect in every way, with her mother's dark hair and her father's determined chin. As Kade held his daughter for the first time, watching Delilah's exhausted but radiant face, he marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that blood-soaked ravine to this moment of pure joy, a path neither could have imagined. I never thought I would have this, Delilah said softly, echoing his thoughts. A home, love, family. Kade sat carefully beside her on the bed, cradling Catherine between them. When I found you that day, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never imagined I was finding my heart. My brave cowboy, Delilah murmured, reaching up to touch his cheek. Thank you for giving me your name, for giving me everything. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, nature's way of offering a fresh start. Inside the cabin, the Fairweather family embraced their new beginning. The word once burned into Delilah's dress replaced forever with a different truth. Wanted, cherished, beloved. Over the years that followed, the Fairweather ranch prospered. 2 more children joined Catherine Samuel Thomas and Elizabeth May, filling the expanded cabin with laughter and activity. Kade's careful management and Delilah's shrewd business sense transformed their modest operation into one of the most respected in the territory. True to his word, Emerson Blake never troubled them again. When news of his death reached them 5 years later, Delilah marked the occasion by donating anonymously to the orphanage in Hope Springs, turning the final page of her past with an act of compassion. On summer evenings, when the day's work was done and the children were tucked into bed, Kade and Delilah would sit on their porch, hands intertwined, watching the sunset paint the western sky in colors no artist could capture. In those quiet moments, they needed no words to express what they had found in each other: redemption, healing, and a love forged in the crucible of their shared journey. And sometimes, when Kade caught Delilah's eye across the dinner table or watched her teaching Catherine to sew or riding beside him checking fence lines, he would remember that blood-soaked dress with its cruel message and marvel at how thoroughly they had rewritten their story. not unwanted, never again unwanted, but chosen daily in all the ways that mattered.